Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Continual Panel Room. Tonight, we're talking about rocking contemporary romance with Nancy Northcott and Amy Wasp. Welcome, ladies. I'm your host and moderator, Jeanne Adams. Nancy, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you write?
Well, as Jeanne said, I'm Nancy Northcott. I write contemporary romantic suspense. That's the quartet over my shoulder. And I write romantic spy adventure, contemporary setting, and paranormal romance in a contemporary setting. I like paranormal romance. I read paranormal romance where things do not go boom, but when I write it, things do tend to go boom at some point.
Amy, what about you?
I write contemporary gay romance, male at the moment. I have a couple of different series. One, small town veterans coming home, about the struggles they have returning to civilian life. And then I have a hockey series, which I do love my hockey boys. Yeah, and I'm just finishing up, like we discussed a leverage type heist group, where each book follows a different couple, but there's an overarching arc to the entire series. And I'm just finishing that up now, and it's been just so much fun.
Oh, that sounds like so much fun. And as I said, I'm Jeanne Adams as your moderator. I usually don't say what all I do, but I write contemporary romantic suspense. I write paranormal romantic suspense, and I write urban fantasy, which is in a contemporary setting. So what do y'all think makes people find comfort and delight in reading about a contemporary setting? I mean, there are rafts of people who only read historicals because they say, oh, that's my escape to go to a different time, or they only read futuristics because that's my escape to read about a different place in a different time. What do you think makes people want to read about now? Amy?
I hadn't thought about that before. Now that you said that, because I read a lot of historicals also, and a lot of contemporary. Maybe it's just relatable, but it's not, it's like an escape, but real, because gosh, I'm gonna have to think about it a little bit while you guys talk, because I hadn't thought about that question before. Why the difference between, say, contemporary as opposed, and maybe the urban fantasy together, which is my preference. I do like contemporary urban fantasy and paranormal romance. I think I like the idea that there can be this magic and maybe this romance and everything today. Like, it could happen. Right.
Right.
I think that might be a lot of the appeal too. Like, these are ordinary people, which is why there's so many, bakery and coffee shops and things like that. And maybe I'll meet the billionaire, he's going to come into the coffee shop one day, and
right around the corner.
I'm on the corner in my apron, and, it's going to be it. Going to sweep me away.
Yeah. Nancy, what do you think?
Well, I think Amy hit on it when she said it's like an escape, but real, and it's relatable. Because I read a lot of historicals too. I write historical fantasy, but when you're reading a historical, unless you've read a whole lot of them in the same period, the world isn't familiar. And so sort of the learning corner of your brain has to function while you're reading. And I think it's easier to just fall into a contemporary, even if you live in a city and it's set in a small town, or vice versa, because the way people interact are going to be familiar. Maybe if you've never lived in a small town, you're not familiar with the person who knows the business of absolutely everyone in town, but otherwise, it's familiar.
Yeah, I was going to say something like that. I think so too. There's no barrier to entry in contemporary romance for that.
Right. Well, I think there's also an aspect that you get to see someone solving whatever the crisis is, or solving whatever the problem is, so that you can sort of have that moment of thinking, well, they're in the same time and space that I am, and they don't have these any extraordinary powers or whatever, and they managed to get through this. And so therefore it's to me, I think sometimes it's the reassurance that you too can get through whatever it is you get through. And we as authors, we kind of put our characters through unmitigated hell. So, if they can get through it, we can get through it, right?
Yeah.
We all tend to try to bring variety by the setting sometimes. And you were saying, Amy, that you had the leverage situation in your
Yeah, that's
series.
not realistic, you know. Compared to some books
It's super fun.
yeah, I try to keep it fairly realistic with but then again, romance is not a realistic genre, you know. There's a big fantasy element even to mainstream contemporary romance, you know. If I can write, sometimes I think writing two 21-year-old hockey players finding forever love is just as much ridiculous as a heist to stop a ring of human traffickers, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Possible though, so
Possible,
maybe not
right? It's
probable,
all
maybe not probable, but certainly possible.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. And now I already forgot the question. I'm sorry, my Adderall wears off around now, and it gets a little bit harder.
Well, actually, the question really was, what are some of your favorite locales for setting your contemporaries? Where do you like to, what arenas do you like to play in? Obviously hockey for
I
you.
like cities. I like cities that have a lot of options. You know, this last book is set in Vegas, which has been kind of fun. I hate Vegas personally. Nothing offensive to anyone who lives there. It's just not a desert person, and I don't gamble. But I like to have my options open, unless, again, like the small town romances, it's part of the reason. So whatever the location, I pick it specifically. Like it is part of the book. It's a character. That's why I don't set things in like random towns. Your options affect your everyday life, right? And they reflect something on the characters. Your character's there for a reason, whether they're trapped there or they moved there, they're born there, or they stayed there. That all of that is a reflection of their life up into the moment we open the book. So the setting plays a big part. Even what room you have conversations in matters. You know, let alone the settings. But yeah, I do enjoy cities, which is why I love a good urban fantasy.
Right.
You know, give me that hidden, like, underground world. And that's another thing. Cities can have all these different neighborhoods in them. So it gives you a lot to play with.
Yeah, it really does. What about you, Nancy? What do you love about settings, and what are some of your favorites?
Well, my all-time ever favorite is England in any period. The Death Brew Affair is set in England, and its siblings will be as well. And the book with the pumpkins on it and the one directly above it are set in a castle on the Welsh Marches. The one with the pumpkins is an anthology, and Jeanne actually has a story in there too. It's a mixture of different kinds of romance for the holidays. But I grew up in a small town, and so I know small towns better than I know anything else, because I've never really lived in a city. I visited, I enjoy them. Like Amy says, the different neighborhoods are fascinating. But Worth the Wait is set in a small town. It's about a small town guy. It's a second chance at love story. And Danger's Edge is set in Washington, D.C. So I like different settings. I think for me, a small town community, which is also what's in Sentinel, the paranormal romances, offers an opportunity for people who know you. They know, as we say in the South, your people. You know, they know who your family was 2 or 3 generations back. And that is definitely a mixed blessing. You can play that either way. And I think you get that in urban neighborhoods when people have lived there for a long time. But I don't think it is as, I'm not sure organic is the right word, as that sense of community is in a small town. So
interwoven maybe into the thing. But this is actually an important difference between the genres. I write gay romance. So if I set them in a small town, say even a small town in the South or something, I have to explain, that has to come into play in the story, whether the characters are out, whether they come out, what the whole reaction is, right, to them being gay.
Right.
It adds, it's not an easy option. Like for that, it's more difficult.
I think that's definitely a difficult option in a small town setting, as opposed to a larger city where you can be more anonymous, or there's more of that.
Yeah,
You know?
there's more variety. Like you can, I have to address it. I can't not address it. Is the thing, right? I have to.
Right. Whereas a story set in a city, you can just jump right in.
I can just jump right in. Right. There's less, and I've been lucky. I've lived everywhere. I've lived in Bangkok and I've lived in London. I went to grad school, and now I'm in a city. I'm a town of like 1,600 people where I can't even get a pizza delivered here. Like there's nothing delivered. I'm 6 miles outside of the town of 600 people.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I have a nice variety, and I grew up on the suburbs of Long Island, so.
Yeah, so you do have a nice variety of background. Let us welcome Elle Keaton tonight. Hey, Elle, how are you tonight?
Hi there. I'm good. Sorry about being late. I take my kitty to the vet.
Let's jump right in and let you introduce yourself and tell us what you write.
All right. Well, I'm Elle Keaton, and I write romance, romantic suspense, and some contemporary. I tend to write mostly romantic suspense in that genre. They're all set in small made-up towns in Washington State, which is where I live, although I do live in Seattle, not a small town. And like Amy, I have also lived all over. So
yeah, we're practically neighbors now.
My characters visit places, but I like I love being able to make my own rules about my place where my stuff is. So I don't know. That answers your question. So there you go.
Yes,
that's my short answer.
I need a fangirl moment because I just finished reading like all of Ellie's books. I finished all of them like 2 weeks.
Oh no!
I read like through the whole set. So if you see someone who went and like borrowed all of your books one at a time, that was me, and I loved them so much. And when I'm like Portland,
that's really
so
wonderful.
I was like, I could get up there. I could just go check everything out, right? Because I'm like 3 hours from Seattle, I think.
Yeah, that's not bad at all. You're just outside Portland then?
Yeah, I'm closer to Astoria, about 45 minutes from Astoria.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, cool. Very cool.
So, Elle, one of the questions we were talking about, Elle, was what do you think makes people find comfort in a contemporary setting? Obviously, we read historicals to escape, or we read science fiction and fantasy or paranormals to escape. What do you think makes people find fun and comfort in reading? Because, there are people, that's all they read. They only want to read contemporary. They don't want to read anything historical or paranormal. What do you think helps people? What do you think people get out of it and how they find it?
That's a really good question. Off the cuff, not having thought about an answer, so this is just going to be me kind of thinking. I think it is the familiar, and yet it's not your life, right? It's the familiar. It's the world that we live in, maybe without a few things that we won't mention that are happening right now in that world, but for the most part, it's, and we know that, especially with romance, there's going to be a happily ever after. So even if my world as a reader is hard right now, I can dive into somebody else's world and know, oh man, look at them. They're fighting for their love. They're going to make it. Oh, maybe they won't make it. Oh yes, they're going to make it. And it's happy. And I think that's why people like contemporary.
I think so too. We talked about that a little bit before you jumped on, and we were talking about the locales, that we liked small town settings. We liked cities for the anonymity. And do you have a favorite setting?
Well, I write, so I have a series, 2 series that are set in small towns in Washington State. And those are my favorite only because I get to make the rules, so like they're still Washington State. I can still do my thing with the, because I have I will tell you that my worst habit in the world is writing about the weather. I love writing about the weather, and I hate having it be nice in my books because then I can't write about the rain or whatever. I do have a series set in Seattle as well, and because I grew up here, and so I feel like I can, but it's harder to write for me. I find it more difficult to write a story set in a city where people can go around behind you and be like, well, that's not there and that's not there. And I'm like, give me a little break here.
Let's put a little disclaimer in and say, look, I know that this isn't blah, 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 but just give me this one.
Yeah.
Gimme. I needed this to be here.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done that before. Nancy and I were in an anthology together, and I basically plunked a hotel in the middle of what was, at the time we wrote the stories, a vacant lot.
Mhm.
And by the time the book was out and in the world, the imaginary hotel we had put on that particular corner has been replaced by an office building. But
Oh, well,
but nobody really cared because they knew it was fiction. So
no, well, I said my hockey series is set in Seattle before the Kraken were a thing, you know, because it actually is the perfect town for a hockey team, as evidenced by the fact that they sold out in like 10 minutes. Like,
Oh yeah, it was fast. It was really
chaos.
fast.
So not just, and I think someone else did too. Someone else has a series set in Seattle too. So
I think Lori Witt does.
no, it was some MF writer, big
Oh.
one too. I was thinking of, I can't remember her name. Some hockey.
well, there are several people who have set things there, especially, and one of them is a
The
hockey team. Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah.
It's-
So how do you think the times have changed with writing contemporary romance? I mean, I started back in what I consider the dark ages, in the mid 2000s, publishing, and there were certain tropes and certain things that were popular back then that aren't popular anymore, and certain things that were sort of taboo then that are now like, yeah, go for it. Obviously, there's a huge surge and influx of male romance, which is awesome. Both you, Elle, you and Amy write male romance, which is outstanding, that there's so much more availability of that. And it's mainstream, it's cool. But even with that, the tropes have changed from when it started. So Nancy, what do you think has changed since you started writing contemporary? What do you think sort of was popular and no longer is, or is now, and that you can write about that you couldn't then?
Well, there are many fewer obnoxious alpha males. Alpha males are not as obnoxious as they were at the turn of the century. I'm sure the books are out there where I would just like to send the hero into timeout and say, grow up and think about how somebody else feels. But I don't run across those. I don't think they're as common, or, to use a phrase that's like, no pun intended, dominant in the industry as they were.
Yeah.
I think you have more flexibility. I think there's more room for a hero to be not always in charge and always in control than there used to be. And I think that opens up plot possibilities as well as character possibilities.
Right.
And then of course, at one point, the roles allotted to women were very, very narrow. Mm-hmm. And now that's not the case. And so those are the two things that I think have changed significantly in that time.
Yeah, I think that the last probably 10 years, I have not seen a too stupid to live heroine, or hero for that matter. Because when I first started reading in the genre, I was like, these sheep can't come out of the rain. What the dickens? So what do you think, Elle, I don't know how widely you read across the male-female genre or the male-male genre, but do you think there have tropes that have changed in your reading of contemporary romance? Male, female, or male, male?
Completely. No, I read a ton of MF because I'm actually planning on expanding a new pen name this year, hopefully, maybe next. If not, it'll be early next year. But that's beside the point. And I think what I've seen change is that, like, aside from the Too Stupid to Live, which I guess it has been a little bit in the MM, but they're usually comedies kind of things. But as far as MF goes, I agree that there's less of that horrible alpha male. Like, there are some that are super alpha but I just put them away, and I don't ever seem like really at the super top of the list anymore. Right. I just feel like the heroines have gone from when I started reading, in order for them to be, at all a heroine, they had to be like an amateur sleuth or something, right? And now we can just have, or they were like, I don't know, some kind of ridiculous thing, and they solved everything, and it was really a mistake. It wasn't their crafty thinking, right? But I think books like, even though it's not romance, Patricia Cornwall, her kind of has led into this like much more intelligent heroine who and I like it a lot. And even in like the kind of like cliffhangery once a month people that are publishing out there, which I totally like, that's amazing. I can't
I
do
wish I
that.
could do that.
I know, right? But their characters are both the male and the female are well rounded. You know, like the guy, they have men changing diapers, which is like, you know, when I first started reading romance, are you kidding me? Never. You know, that didn't happen. It's like the most unromantic thing ever. But I've actually read books where it was like the most romantic thing that the character could do. So that's my thinking.
What about you, Amy? What are your thoughts?
I actually do, now that I think of it, read a bunch of MF. I'm just very particular in it because it's not my real world either, you know. So, and I have to say the ethnic diversity has been so much greater, even like
Absolutely.
even in historicals. Like I read a lot of Courtney Milan because I love her stuff, you know, especially the Duke Who Didn't. I would like to put a plug in because that book is amazing if you have not read it. And some neurodiverse characters too, for want of a better word. I'm trying to think of the one I just read. It was a Scottish one, and the main character was very ADD. And because when you said The Too Stupid to Live is what made me think of it, because I suffer from that, and I see the lot of ditziness, and it's not stupid, and she's not treated as stupid either by the author or the male main character, you know. So I really appreciate that look of ethnic diversity in the main characters, male and female, and the fact that people, you know, have different ways of approaching the world. There's not quite the same assumption of one person. I read a lot back in the 70s, like of my mom's stuff, you know, my mom's romance, all that kind of stuff. And it was more, I mean, you can still find those motorcycle club, big alpha male things in MF. Yeah. And there's the whole golden romance, which we're not going to get into, but
well, but I think you're right. I think it's become a more, honestly, more realistic look at both men and women.
Mm-hmm.
There are women astrophysicists, there are men astrophysicists. You know, there are people who are neurodivergent who fall in love. There are people who are, you know, we get a broader brushstroke of the real world, I think, these days than we ever did.
Yeah, even in the last 10 years, you know.
I'd say even in the last 5.
I agree. Yeah, even in the last 5, I've seen a lot. And there's a lot more discussion about it within the reader communities on Twitter and Facebook too, you know.
Yeah. I think we're seeing a different shift as well. And I'd love y'all's take on this, starting with you, Nancy, about the shift in ages too. I mean, when, you know, Amy, you mentioned your mother's romance. When I first started looking at romance, you know, when I was a teenager, all the heroines were fresh and dewy and 18 or 20.
Yeah.
And Nancy, I know you and I've talked about this a little bit, but my perspective seems, at least from my perspective, I think we're seeing heroines across the age range, and including I've seen some where the heroine is older than the hero. Yeah. So what's your perspective?
Well, I think that's right. And when you started your question, it made me think about a historical romance that I put into an RWA contest many a year ago. And one of the comments from one of the final round judges was, at 24, your heroine's a little long in the tooth.
Oh my goodness.
And you know, granted, a lot of times women got married a lot younger back then, although in the Restoration period, the 1660 to 1685, women were not married in their early teens as a rule. I mean, we kind of all have that image from the medieval period, but it didn't necessarily carry forward. Anyway, I think that's true. And I think you see more women who are successful in their own businesses. They're established, they're in their late 20s, early 30s, even their 40s. And there are romances that I see with heroines and heroes who are older. Right. I think that's still more common in women's fiction than it is in romance, but those books are out there. And I think in part the rise of self-publishing has aided and abetted this, because there's no gatekeeper to say, well, your heroine is
a little long in the tooth,
you know. So I would say that's right. And I'm trying to think of specific ones offhand. And of course, none are coming to mind because we're sitting here on camera, but I know they're out there.
Well, I know Karen Crane's Cross Spring series, all of her heroines in her books are a little older and usually second chance at love situations and that sort of thing. And I know her books have been fairly popular. Amy, what's your take on that? Do you see the age ranges changing?
I do. I don't know about in so much in MF, but in the MM world, there's also a lot of age gap is very popular.
Right.
Like,
Right.
But it was interesting for me because my youngest child is 21, so it's like you become very aware of what is actually realistic for that. And I don't like writing sex scenes with people my kids' ages. It's like a little off-putting. I'm like, but yeah, I have noticed that that 18-year-old, I'm a virgin and she's mine, it's become a subgenre, almost a niche. Like, so if you're looking for that, you can find it, but it's not the expected. I don't go into any contemporary romance expecting any particular age, generally mature, like mid-20s to mid-30s, I guess, right? That's still kind of the main, but that seems a little bit older. If 24 was long in the tooth, and I love to read older antagonists, obviously, because I am. So I think you have so much more to work with too. You have so much. As a writer, it's much more interesting for me to write older characters.
Right. Well, they've got more life than
experience. Yeah. And when a 21-year-old says, "I've waited my whole life for this," you're like, "Come on." You're like, "What's that? 12 years that you remember, if that?" So it's just more oddly realistic, I think, to have older characters, and I definitely see that. Guys have always been older, though, right? I mean, that's a pretty common thing. Older men and younger women.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was so delighted to find a few where it was the older woman, younger man. I was like, awesome. And you're
right. Back, right? That was one of the first ones with that. That was a big deal when that book came out for that.
Yeah, and I know in the male category there are some May Decembers and there are some age gaps, but even that doesn't seem as prevalent as 20 to 35. Let's figure it out, kind of starting
because I think it comes into too that by the time you're mid-30s or 40s, if you aren't married or something, then you have to explain why in your life and in the books. Like, so you do have
commitment phobic. Yeah.
Right. Are you widowed? Are you divorced? Are you is there something wrong with you? Have you been away? So it adds a different element, which is interesting. And I actually saw a weird I don't know if it's weird, a survey that said a lot of readers didn't like Second Chance because they didn't feel that the character was deserving of a second chance because of how they broke up the first time or whatever happened to the relationship the first time. So that's made me a little gun shy on that too,
Yeah. What about you, Elle?
Oh, I think I was listening to what Nancy was saying, and I agree. Yes, there's a shift to older characters, not huge shift, but there's also characters that don't. There's so many things that I think, and what really honed me in was when you were talking, Nancy, about the self-publishing effect. And I think that the lack of the realization that self-pub and the demand by the readers for good self-pub, like well edited and good, nice covers and all that kind of thing, has opened up the gates for, like, we've always wanted these books. We have wanted books where the love interest was 45, right? I mean, just because you're 45 doesn't mean you're dead. And so I think that has been the biggest thing that the stories have been waiting to be told. And the fact that we can now tell our stories is thanks a lot to self-publishing. I definitely write older. I don't always. The series actually that's on my little screen there, that's a younger series. That's probably my youngest series, and it is the one that I set in Seattle. And they're like between 24 and 28, but most of my characters are usually between 35 and 40. And when you're talking about an MF that's older, I know that Susan Stoker just put a little novella out that's like, I think that the guy is 50 and the woman's like 48 or something, and it isn't Second Chance, but it's kind of as a cute little, what I mean? Like, and I was like, woohoo, go team. So I really do think that we're all the things that we can see now, you know, we're not just stuck with that. And I don't want to knock Harlequin, because Harlequin has done fine. They've offered, you know, they maybe sometimes they're slow to change, but sometimes they're not. And they were there in the 70s, you know, and they've come forward into the 2021, and you know, but we don't need that kind of rescue heroine anymore, that person who doesn't know how to get in from the rain, like you were saying. And the older characters are much more compelling, and you're right, they have a story to tell, they have a reason why they're there, you know. And we've got, I just that's my take on it. And I like writing older characters, although, and I do find it a challenge to write younger characters, because I tend to like, I'll see myself writing, and then all of a sudden I realize, I don't know if that person would know that. And, you know, so I'll have to go check. But at the same time, I think about my kids, you know, my kids everybody thinks their kids are smart. My kids are going to be 22 and 24. And, you know, they know a lot of stuff. So I have to always remember that they, you know what, they do know how to get into the rain, and they make their own decisions, and they live on their own. So yeah, anyway, that's enough of that, but that's my thing.
Well, you know, it's interesting, as we've all been talking, one of the questions that sort of popped up for me is, there used to be, especially in contemporary, there used to be some pretty big taboos. You couldn't write male for one thing. You couldn't write any kind of LGBTQI and get a whiff of a chance at publishing. But there was a point too where, Nancy, you were mentioning contests. I entered several contests with baseball romance, and was told with no uncertain terms that sports stories didn't sell.
Really?
Yeah. Well, then, as Elle and Nancy were both saying, the advent of self-publishing, there was obviously a market, because they sold like hotcakes. And you know, Amy, your hockey series is proof in the pudding, right?
Yeah, I mean, who would read a hot athlete, rich professional athlete coming to swoop in? Like, what's not to love about that?
What's not to love about a hockey hunk? Yeah.
Players, they have those arms, and they have them with the butts. Yeah, you know.
Yeah. Well, you know, so that was the old days. And have we instituted new taboos? Are there things that you find or hear about that people are saying, no, we don't want anybody to write about that? Are there new taboos, or are we just sort of letting it fly? What do you think, Nancy?
Well, I'm probably not the right person to ask, because I've never had an idea that was sufficiently unconventional for it to run into trouble. I mean, my fantasy and science fiction are more out there than my romance. I tend to think in fairly traditional terms about that, and by which I mean one couple at the center of the story,
right,
as a rule, and usually male female, because that's what I read the most of. It's interesting though, the book with the pink cover, The Death Brew Affair, that has a continuing couple. And that was a marketing challenge. And I ended up publishing it myself, because, I mean, I call it romantic spy adventure because it is a continuing couple. And if you say romantic suspense, people expect you to have a new couple in each book, because that's how the genre is defined. And so I think if you're doing something that steps outside reader expectations, like if you call it romantic suspense and then you keep doing the same couple, it throws people. And so I think the issue is more, how do I describe what this is so that readers who want this can find it, and readers who buy it will not go, well, this isn't what I thought it was going to be at all. Right. And so to me, that's more of a challenge than, well, I shouldn't write this story. Although I will say, I will never write a story in which someone who commits sexual assault is a good person and gets away with it and gets an excuse. I won't do that. That's me personally. I think people could do it if they wanted to. Wouldn't be a book I would care to read, but you know, there we are. So that's kind of a long-winded way to answer your question.
I'm good with long-winded. It's okay. Elle, what do you think on that? I mean, are there some taboos that you see that have been major ones that you thought you could never write that you've broken, or do you see any new ones that have come about?
that I tend to, because somewhat like Nancy, I don't generally read, I guess, I do read MM, and that was taboo, like you said, but it's not now. I think it's interesting the bully romances, and I don't see those in MM. I think that is actually a taboo MM trope, but I have seen them, and I think I'm surprised, I guess, by that. I don't know if there's anything that is super taboo. You can find it if you want it, I guess, with self-publishing. Yeah. And I do stay away. Funnily enough, my last series I do market it as romantic suspense, and it is a series of 3 books that follows the same character. And there were people that were mad at me with the first book, but the people that I got with that stayed, they loved it, and it's been my best series. But it's because that's a funny thing in terms of just knowing like reader expectation and
marketing and metadata versus taboos.
Yeah. Sorry, I kind of veered off topic, but
that's okay.
I'm not, I have to admit, I don't go looking for a lot of the taboo things. So I don't know what's out there so much as what to do to meet reader expectations. I guess I look at it from the other way. So,
well, I think it's interesting that because we don't have the gatekeepers that we had with traditional publishing, maybe there isn't that perspective that there used to be. And maybe you can give me your thoughts on this, Amy, but it used to be that there were the kind of things that publishers would say, well, we're not buying any of this. And so it wasn't exactly a taboo, but it wasn't exactly, well, we're encouraging you to submit another vampire romance.
Right. Because baseball's not really a taboo. Like, that's not a thing. But coming back to the bully romances, which I was thinking, with going back to the shift we were talking about in books, with the decline of the alpha male kind of stuff and the 18-year-old virgin, it kind of, in a way, brings that stuff back as almost subversive and taboo. So you do end up with these bully romances where there's definite alpha and there's like an 18-year-old virgin, and the blurb is like, she's mine. I knew from the moment I set her up, which becomes kind of the new taboo, right? But they're out there. Again, in self-published MM and general LGBT kind of stuff, you can find anything, right? And if you go onto Wattpad, you can literally find anything. And like, there's nothing that people won't write. I mean, there's things Amazon won't advertise, but in general, you can still put it up there. But I think in say the mainstream romance, and oddly enough, I found out it's hard. Contemporary romance can be actually very conservative. In general, readership, surprisingly, even for my books, I was surprised sometimes at the views of my readers. Books with African-American people on the cover sell less. They just do than books with white male characters. And my books are considered very mainstream in the MM world because they're all basically, white guys, white middle class guys.
Right.
But yeah, I think the new taboos are coming, or whatever story you can't tell is what becomes taboo, right? So if we can't tell these, I fell in love with my rapist stories because it's not, if somebody wants to read them, they'll come up and they'll find them somewhere else.
Right. They'll find it in Slash if nothing else.
Yeah. And it's fine. It's just, I like it. It's just a shifting thing,
Yeah.
Well, and I remember the furor a couple of years ago about the Rita finalist book that was a romance between a Nazi concentration camp guard.
Oh my God, yes.
And a Jewish prisoner.
Yeah.
I haven't read the book. I don't know anything about it. It's not a setup that appeals to me.
Right.
But I would say that for many, many readers, just judging by the reaction to that book, that setup is particularly a taboo.
Yeah. Slave wars, slave kind of, that's historical, it's not contemporary. But yeah, that Nazi thing. Even across the aisle right now, I mean, the last couple of months, there's been huge controversy on Twitter about a couple of books that came out with that, like Republican, Democrat love.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
We're not talking like Marley Matin or whatever, and but like
the
recent ones, there was a lot of backlash that I saw on Twitter from the people I follow. Like I don't, as we all know, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Well,
that certainly would be a new taboo. I mean, it's been always sort of interesting and slightly amusing to me that there is a whole market for Amish romances.
Yeah.
Like this
Contemporary
whole
Amish, yeah.
this whole niche market where you want to go live in essentially a commune with all of these incredibly intense rules. And I'm like, okay, whatever floats your boat, right? But it always has been interesting to me in the recent years, really the last 6 or 8 years, where we've come into our own with self-publishing, and self-publishing is really, really a vital part of the publishing industry now, where if it went away suddenly, there would be riots, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that because there isn't that gatekeeper who says, well, that is not to my taste, therefore it is taboo. You don't send me a baseball romance because their sports stories don't sell, right? That has pretty much gone away. As you said, Amy, if you want it, you can find it, right?
Mhm.
But it's still amusing and interesting to me that there are these little sub niches, and I didn't know bully romance was a thing, so now I do. But that being a niche market, or the Amish thing being a niche market, or that Hallmark won't buy a book that has anything more than a fairly chaste kiss in it.
Mhm.
There's still a huge market for the very sweet, behind closed doors only
Yeah.
romances, and yet the rise, the hair has been one of the biggest shifts in the female romance world, at least to my perspective. Could more to that because you write some very seriously kick-ass heroines. How that sort of changed the whole tenor of our genre.
Your question got garbled on.
Oh, okay. Wasn't
sorry.
just good.
Oh, I'm sorry. My question was, the rise of the kick-ass heroine has really been a major shift in probably only the last 10 years. So how do you think that's affected your work, and what do you like about that? What do you think about that?
Was that to me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't write a lot of women, so.
Sorry.
No, that's to you, Nancy, because you write some seriously kick-ass heroines. So.
Well, thank you. I try. We can tell from looking at me that I'm basically a geek, but I really like women who clean clocks and kick indoors. And so I definitely think there is more of a market for that than there was when I first started writing. But there's still room for the heroine who runs a bakery or takes care of her family or is active in her community as opposed to in the business world or the spy world. I mean, I like spies because stuff blows up, kick indoors, and so forth. But I do think those are more popular than they once were. And I think it's partly because it doesn't seem like mainstream publishing is feeding the romantic suspense market the way readers maybe want it to be fed.
Right.
But I would not have written a female spy 15 years ago.
Right. Right. I think one of the things that's a big appeal about male-male romance is you have equal partnerships. And I think that's why a lot of women read them as well as males, because you don't ever have the situation of being unequal.
Mm-hmm.
What is your perspective on that, Amy? Do you think that that's been a part of why it's so popular with women as well as with men?
I mean, that's a giant question in the whole genre. It's not unproblematic, for a better word, and we do talk about how much internalized misogyny comes into it as readers and writers, like why readers don't identify as much with female characters, even in all media, TV shows and medium. And I think taking away that inherent power imbalance that is automatically there in any male-female relationship is a thing. I think it is one of the appeals. Then there's also, I don't know how to say this, there's also a tendency of readers. The biggest majority of readers is the same as any romance. It's, 30 to 60-year-old women, white, straight women. So it's always going to be that. And they just like gay couples. They think they're cute. So there's some of that too. But I do, like I said, I do read a lot of the MF romance, more than I realized. And I think we've opened up different ways for women to be perceived as being strong. You don't have to be a CIA assassin to be strong. You can show the strength in a bakery owner as well.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
Right.
we've allowed that your strength is not measured just by the masculine traits anymore,
Right.
which I think is a great opening. Gives you so much better characters to read and to write.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What is your perspective, Elle?
I missed some of your question because my internet is a little bit unstable. So if you wouldn't mind refreshing my memory, that would be
Not at
awesome.
all. Well, it seems to me that one of the things with male romance that's so appealing is there is not that automatic power imbalance. And
Right.
I'm really interested in your perspective on what's the appeal of having the balance, and do you see that going anywhere with male-female romances? Or
Yeah, I do. I think you're right. You're right. There is that equality that, because it's the same sex couple that we're writing about. And I also think for women, there's a sense, not for all women, but like if we're writing sex scenes or whatever, there's this sense, there's not this objectification of that we've probably grown up with, even internalized all of our lives. And so I think that that's a big appeal as well, if it's not a behind the doors kind of book. It's interesting to me because someone will come up and, on Facebook and they'll say, hey, I'm never reading an MF romance again because I just love MM and everything is so equal, but it's really not. I think that there's plenty of situations where it isn't unequal. There's the daddy books and there's the age gap books and there's the rich and the billionaire books and all these other books, but it's not a physical makes them different. And I think that's where readers are thinking, I'm not sure I'm saying this right, but I think that's where I think that doesn't mean as much to them as this kind of equality, like you're saying, the fact that it's the same sex. And I do think it's bleeding over into MF, which is why, in the kick-ass heroine, because we're seeing this kind of, equality of love is love, right? And of course we can have, a kick-ass heroine because they're out there in the real world. Plenty of us grew up with single moms that they were kick-ass, right?
Right.
They did it. They pulled themselves up and they did their thing. And so, yes, I think we are going to see a bleed over. Maybe it'll only be in the self-published world, but I don't think so, because I do see books that are like, even some of the big alpha, like Seal series books have really good female characters, and they're not beautiful, or they're not skinny, or they're not, what I mean? Like all the things that we kind of grew up with in the 70s and 80s, that these women aren't that, and yet they're still getting their love story. And I think that that's kind of something also, so.
I think contemporary romance has really grown in the years I've been reading it. And I think a lot of our discussion tonight has been around some of that growth. Nancy, what's your perspective of the change? Do you think we're on the right track to making it a better world with what we're writing?
Whoa, no pressure.
No pressure at all.
We're right. I think this is just my personal slant on it. But if a book I write gives somebody an escape for a few hours, if they close the book and they're smiling, then I've made that little corner of the universe brighter for a little bit. And that, I don't know what else I would ask for. Sure, lots of money, but I would like to make that corner of the universe a happy place and give somebody an escape, because books have always been an escape for me. So I don't really have the global perspective you were asking me about, but I hope that we're providing some escapism for people and a nice break when they want one.
Yeah. Amy, I'm really not looking for, the
Life, the universe, and everything.
oh, yeah, but I'm sorry if I made it sound that way. But how do you think it's going for us in contemporary romance?
I think it's going well. I think it's getting more respect as a genre than it used to. I think that there's a lot of back. It's still, I think, like, it's not a driving genre. You know what I mean? It's not pushing the boundaries of things, but it brings the boundaries to a big audience. Like it has a far reach.
Right.
So like, I write veterans. I have my Veterans Affairs series, and pretty much every book deals with different kinds of PTSD because it's one of the most common reactions now. We have millions of vets, more than we've ever had at any time of society, coming back and dealing with PTSD, and it's very difficult. And I get a lot of letters from vets and people who are with them who say, thank you for, you showed this really well, and you showed that we can have love, like we can have this relationship and we deserve it, and we're not hiding and we're not embarrassed. I think that is an important role that contemporary romance can play by normalizing it, by normalizing anything. And I think that the mass appeal of the genre is its strength. You know what I mean? Because it does allow us to reach this huge audience,
right,
and talk about these things.
Yeah.
So I think it's got a lot of opportunity. I don't think it's not at the moment, even in self-publishing, except for very small, like I said, a boundary pushing kind of thing, because it's a comfort read for most of us, right? For me, I want my comfort read, but enough to bring up maybe some issues, and we can touch on them. I touch on one of my main characters is a Baptist kid from Alabama, and I did a lot of research on that, talk to actual Baptist, because I'm gay, but I'm not Baptist. I don't know what that's like, but somebody can see themselves in that story and say, this is how you addressed it. Because I wanted the person to keep their faith at the end of the book. It was too easy to have them walk away.
Right.
And I wanted them to be, it's important. I wanted to show how it's important to people, and that you can be gay and have your faith at the same time.
Right.
And I guess in some places that is like a big deal, right? Like,
right.
That's still like a kind of a weird thought.
Yeah, I think for some people it is. Elle, what about you? What do you think the perspective is on contemporary romance and what it does in the world?
I think it's so underestimated. Like we're all sitting here and talking about it, and we know the power of a book in a person's hand and a power. So let me tell you a story. This is old, but it's my story. And so Suzanne Brockman, #1, like a huge fan. I read all of her stuff and I was super, and that's actually how I discovered MM, but that's not what the story that I'm telling. She wrote, when she was writing a lot, she wrote a lot of vets, or a lot of people with like alcoholism or something like this, right? And I would read these books, and I started to realize something, and it led me to discovery about the relationship that I was in at the time, that I hadn't realized was that fact, right? Was like, oh, this isn't just me making stuff up here. This is something that's someone else has also seen, and so anyway, long story short, she really actually changed my life because of a romance book that she wrote, right? And not only that, but now I write MM because I discovered MM through one of her characters, but that was long after my life-changing experience. So I think romance, as much as people like sneer and look at the cover and, talk about the hot chest or the abs or whatever, A, they're jealous, but B, they don't understand the power of a book in a person's hand, that happy feeling or that empowering feeling like, hey, so what if the character runs a bakery and she successfully does it, and she avoids getting, put out of business by the mob that wants her building because of something, right? Some person could be reading that and say, oh, I'm strong enough too, right? And that's where I think our power comes from. As writers, and we can just ignore people that poo-poo us because we are the best-selling genre.
We are, yeah. We are 64% of the books sold.
Yep.
The next 3 genres combined do not make it to the number of romance books sold. So go us, right?
Yes.
Well, we are about out of time, so I'm going to ask each of you to tell our viewers where they can find you on the web. Why don't we start with you, Nancy?
You can find me at nancynorthcott.com. I spend more time than is good for me on Twitter, where I'm at Nancy Northcott, so you can connect with me there. I have an author page on Facebook, which I occasionally visit, and I'm sometimes on Goodreads.
Excellent. Amy?
If you search Amy Wasp, it'll come up. I use that name everywhere. It's aewasp.com. And I'm most active on my Facebook group in Facebook, which again, there's a link from my webpage from ae.com. It's just Amy's Wasp Nest. I tend to chat there the most.
Cool. Excellent. Elle?
Yeah, I have a website, ellekeaton.com, and I'm on Facebook as well. I'm trying to wean myself of it a little bit just because it's very distracting, but I do have a Facebook group called The Highway to Elle, which I happen to think is a very clever name. Almost as good as Wasp Nest, but not quite. I'm also on Twitter in a totally different name, but you can, I think if you search Elle Keaton, it still comes up. It's Pirate Queen Reads. And you know, I'm on Goodreads. I do stop in there. I don't hate it. I have a Patreon. You know, I'm around and I love connecting with readers. So hopefully stop by and chat.
And I'm your host, Jeanne Adams, and you can find me at jeanneadams.com. And as Nancy said, I too spend way too much time on Twitter, so you can find me there and on Facebook. And as always, here at ConTinual. Thank you, ladies, for joining me this evening, and we'll see you around the web.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.